Clarke Flynn for coming and joining us on 2win2moro podcast, all about mental health with athletes, the mindset. I really want to let everyone know that's listening about your background and what you've been doing, what you've done in the past, your athletes, and your coaching career.
Yeah, thank you, Magdalena. So I began just kind of as a regular athlete, and I really didn't excel until I had started university and wasn't doing my best at attending class. Really started to fall in love with the gym, and it was just a regular gym, some very little free weights, but a lot of machines. And as we approached our first Christmas, we were notified by the university that you're not allowed to use the gym over the holidays. And there was four of us that had hung out together, and it was like, okay, what are we going to do? And there happened to be one guy that overheard us, and he goes, well, on the other side of the campus, there's these guys that are weightlifting. I don't know what room they're in, but you guys should go looking. So we actually went down some hallways in the athletic building and past some basketball courts. And around the corner came this guy named Mark Cardinell. I was to learn his name later. 6'5", 140 kilos. And he was at the time the biggest man I'd ever seen, because he was not only tall, he had a neck and shoulders, and he had massive quads. To find out later, they were 32 inches in diameter. And he was not fat, but he wasn't built like a bodybuilder. He just had this real athletic movement to him. And so he told us, oh yeah, follow me. And he brought us into this little weight room. We used to call it the dungeon, but it was actually an oversized broom closet. And amongst that group, there were 7 athletes, and it happened to be a national team coach. They were Olympic lifters. They'd already been to the Commonwealth Games in '78 in Edmonton, and they were preparing for the '80 Olympics in Moscow, which was a year and a bit out. And I just thought they were amazing guys. They were easygoing, but very focused. And so they just brought us in, and they started us Olympic lifting. Like, here's a broomstick. Some guys got the barbell, and away we went. So, my first experience in an organized weightlifting environment was underneath a national coach, and my training partners were national team athletes who had competed in Olympics and we're going to the Olympics. So I was blessed on many levels.
Amazing.
And as I continued on down that path as to being what I hoped one day would be a competitive Olympic lifter, I bumped into a friend on campus who I played first division rugby with, and he was on the national bobsled team, but not the Olympic team. And it happened that we had disappointed ourselves at the Lake Placid Olympics. And Jimmy Carr was then a crewman, and he had, as I say, was on the national team, but not the Olympic team. And so he all of a sudden got elevated to, he was the national team, like him and a couple other guys. And he said, "You want to try bobsleigh?" And I said, "Sure." And he says, "Well, we'll go tomorrow." And we were about a 2.5-hour drive from Lake Placid. So I guess I decided schooling wasn't that important the next day. So I went to Lake Placid. And that started my bobsleigh career. Like, since the guys had stopped participating at the Olympics and the team was empty, I went from I had actually never been to the top of a bob run and certainly never competed. And within a few months, it was actually the next winter, my first race, the first time I'd ever been to a top of the bob run was the World Championships in '81 in Cortina d'Ampezzo.
That's a huge place for a first one.
Yeah. And it was a steep learning curve, but we were fortunate. I think we're fortunate just who we are. Nobody's threatened by us, Yeah. And the conversation was already in the air about the possibility that Calgary would get the Olympics in '88. So countries that really had nothing to do with us, and I would identify that as like the East Germans and the Germans and the Austrians and the Swiss, started to sort of help mentor us, because they knew by having a good relationship with us, they'd get early access to the track. And, that leads to better performances by those experienced nations. And so I was very fortunate early in my career to be have relationships with good quality coaches and good programs that were developing. And it was actually at that time that Charles Poliquin came to the gym at Carleton University because I thought he wanted to be an Olympic weightlifter. He was a skinny runt of a guy. But he later told us he didn't want to be an Olympic lifter. He wanted to learn Olympic lifting and how to teach Olympic lifting for coaching his athletes, because it was a very athletic movement and there was lots involved in very simple steps. And we became close friends very quickly. He was more of a runt than I was. And so we would sometimes be on the same platform, or, I'd be getting off and he'd be getting on. So you're loading weights, each other's weights. And
so you actually became a 2-time World Olympic bobsledder.
Well, I went to the 84 Olympics. And then I went to 6 World Championships. One of them I was a demoted spare because I sometimes didn't agree with everything. And then I did Olympic lifting, and I went to a series of meets to qualify for the Olympics in 84, but wasn't successful. And there's lots of reasons why.
I'm sure.
And I think the best reason why is my training partner, Terry Hadlow, qualified, and he was an amazing lifter. He was so mentally powerful that I was never going to be better than Terry. And I'm happy about that. I learned so much from him to go across other sports. And Charles did learn a lot too from Terry and the other guys, just understanding the rehab from injuries and the mental focus. These guys were unbeatable. Terry Hadlow, who people can Google, has the world records for the various age categories and weight categories, still in the masters thing. It's unbelievable. The guy, at the time that he set the most recent world records, which is about 6 years ago, he could barely walk. His knees were so bad. And yet...
So speaking of Terry Adler, Clarke, that mental, just going back to his mental focus, and even, Charles recognized it as well, his mental, how did that make him feel? How did you see that? What was your take on wanting to be like that? Or did you feel yourself?
Yeah, a side story was a coach said to my coach, although Roy said to me one time, although always worked on the positives. And he would always tell stories while we were training. Training sessions for Olympic lifting would take a couple of hours. And he would always have a story. And it was a long story. Like, Jesus, sometimes go on for an hour or more. But in there was a theme and there was a lesson to be learned. But one time Aldo looked at me, and it was a very calm moment. He said, "Clarke, if I had your body in my mind, I'd have world records." Well, for about a month afterwards, we'd walk to and from training. I was on cloud 9. Yeah. I was going, oh my God, like, look what Aldo thinks of my body. And then one day, I think Terry got enough of me, and he said, you could see that another way. And it was like, it's like you have the physicalness, but you don't have the mentalness to be able to lift the big numbers. Well, he sank me. I think I went through like 3 weeks of just depression. And then Aldo said, like, when you stand over the barbell, you have to see the entire lift.
Yeah.
You can have no doubt. There's no room for it. The movements are too fast, and you have to be in front of everything. And that's split seconds, And that really, really was the turning point for me in terms of getting to be able to lift bigger. And also in the bobsleigh world, even as a crewman, which I was at the time, you could take a stopwatch and say, okay, here's the course Innsbruck. And then I could go, and I'd hit a stopwatch, and I could do the whole course in my mind. And at like 56 seconds, I could hit the watch, and we were going down the runs in 56 seconds. So without looking at the time, we're just picturing the way that the sled went. And it was just something that had come from the weightlifting world. Is like, see yourself, see every part of it, every step, the entrance into the sled. Yeah. And so that for me was a bonus, because I didn't get nervous or scared about tracks or outcomes, because no, we weren't winning, but we were certainly moving towards our true potential. Yeah. So it was all built in the weight room though.
Yeah. And, weightlifters do have that focus. And that mental drive. Have you seen that, follow through with your other athletes that you've trained? Because you've trained a variety of athletes, haven't you?
Yeah, I've been lucky enough to do that. And certainly in the judo world where I participated after my sort of, after I retired, you see it there a lot, especially at the highest levels. And Canada has been very fortunate in their training program, identification program, to produce a lot of great champions internationally in judo. And they are all in that world of mental preparation. And it occurs in training. And on the track side, I've been lucky to have some Olympic throwers, hammer and shot put, most recently with Tim Netto. And Tim is always, it's been an area he struggled in because he has good coaches, but it's been a challenge just the size of the guy, and where in Ottawa we don't have the strong support that he needed. But also on the track side, I was lucky enough a few years ago to work with University of Southern California to treat some of their athletes, and it was in a short period of time. But I, met Michael Norman and some others, Rye Benjamin, and there were others. And if you watch how Coach Carol Gilbert started to prepare them and treat them, it was all setting up, and Coach Watts, who had been an Olympic champion in '92, how they started to prepare their athletes for focus way back in November, already talking about the NCAA championships, which were going to be, later that year in Oregon. They already started talking about the weather, if it's rainy, if it's cold, if it's windy. And the athletes start training even on warm days as if it's going to be that way.
Yeah. So we will future pace them. So in having that imagination and picturing, because, picturing everything and having that thought manifests that, physical feeling and that drive, right? So you
Yeah.
are, with your athletes, what did you emotionally see that was challenging? What was the most challenging with your athletes that you saw as a commonality with them?
I think that they had to understand it was not just showing up to training, and starting the training session. Then the training session started before, and how long before just depends on their level of experience or their maturity. But it was the meal before, and it was the sleep and preparation and how you get up. It was stuff that sometimes for me was difficult to articulate, and certainly difficult for them to understand. But it starts with the kid when he's young, and seeing himself and moving his doubts aside, and then maybe at times bringing his doubts forward. And we would talk about it, like Aldo used to say, and I used to try and recreate it in the gym, is just say, okay, here's the situation, your wrist is sore, but you still have to throw a shot put. Okay, so how are you going to get yourself into the circle and not think about the sore wrist? You're just going to think about the flight of the shot. And in with my hockey guys, it's like, okay, you got beat up the period before. Okay, so now you're back on the ice. You've got a slap shot to the ankle. It hurts. You can't even feel it in areas. So how are you going to address the guy? Because now you're in the boards battling for him. And I was fortunate. I think all the time I was fortunate to have guys who could really just play beyond themselves. Yeah. And it was not as much about me, but it was but that they were the reason that made training fun. They knew why they needed to come. They knew from their parents' side that they were spending a lot of money going to a gym, or going to the track. And so they worked hard for it.
And do you think there's a change in mindset from when you trained your athletes to now to athletes today? Do you think there's a difference in athletes' mindsets? Are they not as strong, focused? I mean, they're definitely focused, but you know what I mean, that same drive. You said it was fun. Is there a difference when you trained your athletes?
If I go to the most current group that I like to communicate, which is the national bobsled team. So we have teams in Europe right now, and they just came off a really, I think, a good weekend in Altenburg, Germany, and they're going to Winterberg. And the small amount of communication I have with the athletes, which is small, but I do communicate with the strength coach. they're impressive. These, you know, they're away from families, which I wasn't when I competed. I didn't have a partner, or certainly didn't have children, and these guys do. They're in serious relationships, and they're apart 2, 3, and this for some of them it might be 4 months as they come out of Beijing. I think this group is very mature, and I think they're very focused, and I think they understand why they're there and what they have to do. Now, the challenge for them always is all the exterior noise. So it's now, what about Beijing? You know, there's diplomatic talk and all this. And they're doing a wonderful job of staying focused. In some other areas, I think I have athletes, or I'm aware of athletes who still think that they'll get there. They don't have to do the extra stuff.
Yeah.
And you can't. I wish I could bring back a lot of the athletes who I did train, to have them talk to this new group, to say, just listen. Yeah. Like, you know, because they all think they know. And coach, I was watching this video about this guy and he's doing this. And it's like, oh, geez.
Yeah.
You know, you guys need to really put your phones down and get in your heads.
Yeah. They just have to humble themselves a little bit and look at, you know, you don't know everything. And athletes going from basketballers to, a whole range of sports. These young athletes think they know it, but they really don't when they actually listen to their predecessors and athletes that have had even harder challenges and focus, don't you think?
Yeah. I watched a really interesting presentation the other day in that app masterclass by Wayne Gretzky about mindset. And I did follow his career, not as closely as others, but we're within a couple of years of each other. So I saw him play as a 16-year-old in this Ontario Hockey League, which he was really young compared to the others, and then followed him up into the pros. And you just realize he was always different. He was always, as you said, forward thinking and preparing. And I try and tell kids now, by the way, you might want to watch this. You know, he's got some, yeah, we already do that. And it's like, okay.
If only they knew.
Yeah. And you know what, sadly, by the time they know, it's too late.
Yeah.
There's way too late. So that's why Charles used to say, and we didn't listen to him enough at times. It would be like, you can't push a rope. Like, look, you put it out there. If they don't take it, you need to move on, because you're going to put a lot of energy on that guy, and it's not going to be because of you. It's another circumstance. So move on.
And that's exactly what I'm going to bring up. So if you've got two athletes with potential, and I'm sure you can pick up, and Charles always did too, that you can see potential in one, even though they're both physically gifted, but one's just going to push one forward. What would that be? What is that mental preparation? Is that focus, like you said, with Terry Adler? Can you see that when you see two athletes of the same caliber?
Yeah. Well, I don't know sometimes if I always see it, but you just keep putting a challenge in front of them, and it's whoever keeps showing up. Like, is the guy showing up at 8 in, and is he ready? Or is he coming in just a little after 8 and he wants to talk about his night the night before? I only have so much energy, and you've got 10, 12 hours a day that you're going to expense it on, clients, whether they're paying or whether they're not. It doesn't matter. I'm going to put my effort where the person is going to energize me, and I'm going to be able to give what I can to him, and they're going to be able to receive it. And I think that becomes very obvious early on, who's the guy or who's the woman that you're going to put your efforts to.
Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, I think it's character, and you can spot it right away. You can spot it early on. Maybe not right away, but early on.
You emotionally, how did you feel how did you prep yourself? You said you had no fear. But then I feel like in my experience with some of the athletes, the commonality with all of them is that fear of failure. And like you said before, Clarke, all they're worried about is all the exterior noise. Is my parents going to be proud of me? Am I going to, I have to prove it to them? I'm concerned about that fear of failure, and it's been
Uh,
common.
oh, I'm glad I don't carry the same baggage I used to, but it was all to prove my dad wrong. So he was an abusive man, but that was, he was a factor of his upbringing. And, at one point, I guess I decided I'm going to be bigger, so you'll never do that to me again.
Yeah.
And so I didn't pick his sports. I didn't excel in his sports. I excelled in the other sports that he never really ever did, which was like wrestling or water skiing or rugby, which was one of the first sports I did where I got to do a tour of, go to Wales. And so, but I just kept showing, I'll show up, and I'll show them. And I remember writing a letter after the Sarajevo Olympics, and I wish I hadn't written on many levels, but I think it was just me offloading and saying, I wish I had got here on your support instead of trying to prove you wrong.
Yeah.
And I'm happy I don't have that journey anymore. I don't have to get any more degrees. I have a master's, which didn't do me any good except cost 60,000.
I'm going to get back to that in a minute. So, but I love this story. But I love this story because your experience, and I love that you shared that, because I feel that a lot of the athletes do have to prove things to whoever, and they should be doing it for themselves. And if you had someone to help you and guide you, and as you said, you wrote something to offload it, but if they were to offload it earlier in their career, imagine how they would excel, right? Where would you have been? What would you have done?
Yeah. Like we all know how we carry energy and we take energy from things and we move energy. Yeah, it would have been. And that's why I really enjoy working with the men's and women's bobsleigh team. I find them they've done a lot of work, and that's why you see a guy like Justin Cripps or even Chris Spring, he used to be with us, the Australian program. He now drives for Canada. Like the work he's done to be able to stay in the sport, be competitive, and go through the injuries he has, almost losing a lower limb a number of years ago in a bad crash. Like these guys have done the work. They've worked with many good people mentally. I don't know if any have pursued the hypnosis, which would be an interesting question to ask, but I show up on the therapy side. So I try not to, it's like, I just try and make sure their tissue is the best it can be. I don't try and play in their heads, but I'm lucky enough to communicate with the coaches to ask them that question.
Yeah. And speaking of injuries, because that is, just briefly let us know what you're doing right now. So you're still coaching bobsled, and what else are you doing in the therapy side?
Yeah, so on the medical side, I'm lucky enough at times to work with the bobsleigh team, just on the medical side. So soft tissue, so acupuncture, deep tissue, flossing, cupping, just go through I think I had the other day was counting almost 50 different certifications in soft tissue modalities. Way too many. So it's again that like I'll do another course. So on that side, so primarily about 90% of my time is
Clarke, on holding back on the courses.
yeah. So I do lots on the soft tissue side, probably 90%, and then 10% of the stuff is working with athletes in some form. So either they have they're with a college in the US and they have a strength training program, and I just on the side tweak it. And there's some still strength coaches that I consult with where, they might ask about a certain phase or a certain thing. So I've honestly, since the passing of Charles, I just found myself not trying to be as involved on the strength side. It just was not I didn't find it as fun.
Yeah, he's very sad, and we still miss him, and there's still people that are definitely missing his vigor.
Yeah. And, there was lots of things that people didn't agree with him, but I was lucky enough to know him early on, like when he was just 19. And some of the guys that I hang around with have known him, they knew him when he was 8 and 9 and 10 years old.
Amazing.
And so, we're not fooled on who he was. We know lots of his good points and lots of his character, but he really got me in to develop as a strength coach. He created a good platform and an environment for me to work in and work in my early career. And then he's the one that directed us into the tissue side. He's the one that introduced us to Dr. Mark Scapatici, who's probably one of the handful of top soft tissue guys in the world. And then Scap kind of mentored us further. But there's 2 or 3 of us that we bump into each other every other day. And it's because of Charles that we went that path in soft tissue. Yeah. So I don't know how you thank a guy enough for the gift of a career, of a career that I'm enthused about.
Yeah, by doing what you're doing. You're showing by doing what you're doing. And I'm sure I was only just speaking to Yves Nadal actually, and and he's and he talks about Charles and the way they both have given so much to the industry. And and speaking of what you do, I think you showing up and helping in a way, not necessarily in the gym training, but you're rehabbing them from an injury back into that field. I think that's just as important. And speaking of when they have an injury, Clarke, what do you feel do they still hold back after that injury? And sometimes you've seen pretty bad injuries, like you've mentioned. Do you think they're still holding back when they're not really not in that peak performance? There again is that mindset.
Yeah, I think for some of them it is. I think they just feel like if they get back up to that international level, even when they're competing there's still some piece of resistance. And whether it's resistance in the tissue, even if we've cleaned it up, even if there's no adhesions, it's still there, and it's still in their mind. That's an area I don't play in at all, but I certainly respect the people that do, because I don't know why the wall is here. Oh, yes, absolutely. I've seen it a number of times.
I guess it's maybe because from what my experience is, if they do go to that peak performance again and play at their top athletic ability, they're going to get injured again. And that's what they don't want.
Yeah.
And it's got to hold them back again.
I think in regards to the that part that stays within the DNA of the athlete from a prior injury, I think it's a big challenge to find the pieces that'll help them move through it. I'm not part of that component. I'm on the tissue side, so on the therapy side, I'm interested in what you're saying in terms of the hypnosis, because we do have to take them out of the physical piece and put them in another aura, another dimension, to really look at themselves and what they're trying to do and how they're trying to do it.
Yes. And I've had athletes where I've had to actually get them over and past that and say, in the sessions that they're at their peak performance once again, because what happens is they become tense in their body. And when you're, about the anatomy, and then when they're stressed, they tense. And obviously they're predisposed to more injury. So being relaxed and confident is where they want to be in a mental state.
Yeah.
So you are treating, who are you treating at the moment? So the national bobsled team?
Yeah, so I haven't worked with those guys now. We just prior to COVID was the last time I was with them. And then we're looking, obviously this being an Olympic year, they've picked a good staffing. So mostly what I'm doing right now is just at the hockey players. So I have I don't know, it's a good 20 of them that cycle through, and they being young. So some of them have a very strong future. Like, I don't know, there's probably 5 that could find themselves with their name on their jersey in the NHL. They're a few years shy of that. So now they're in the piece where they're deciding whether they're going to go, whether they're going the university route or a very aggressive we call it the OHL or the Q, which is one level below the professionals, the NHL or the AHL. Wow. So I work with a number of those. They're not regulars, because like any youth, a couple of them say, okay, I'll see you once a week, and some are like every 2 weeks, and some are saying, I'm just going to come in when I'm hurt.
Yeah.
Okay. I guess we don't do prevention. But
They don't. What was Charles? He had a saying for that, didn't he?
yeah, I don't, I think if there's one that I'm thinking of, you can't say it on the air.
I think the people that are watching know Charles, and I think it's
Yeah,
not going to be
yeah.
phasing him too much.
Yeah, well, I see it with a lot of guys. Like I do actually work with some people in the police service industry, and just because of what they do in uniform or what they've done undercover, they have injuries, and they're the same place. It's like, some do come in for preventative, and some come in reactive, and so it's just the way it is. It's almost like, the it's almost like a picture of their life, you
Yeah.
know
And have they ever, when they come to you and it's bad injury, have they actually talked about emotionally, are they ever going to come out of this? Is their career over? Do they mention anything like that to you?
yeah, yeah. Not There's a couple I can think of that talk about it, because it if it continues, they can't do the work the way they do it, so they're going to have to change from a particular area of policing they're doing, and start to transition, in-house and be on a desk. And their skill set says that they really wanted to be in another area. and
Yeah.
and I've been fortunate times to work with some people who work in a specific area of the military, in the Canadian military, and they're not really talked about much, but they've had horrible injuries, like, just, and yet they keep walking forward. They keep doing what they do, and some of them can't, like,
Yeah.
they can't. Their injuries are significant enough that it's changed their lifestyle, even affecting their home lives.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah,
Have you've been injured throughout your career, haven't you?
yeah, yeah, yeah. I think I was lucky, that my injuries, when they came about, were always at the end of the season. So they were season ending, but they were at the end of the season. And so mine was my worst one was always my lumbar. Like I fractured the vertebrae in my low back, and when I first did it was in December '83. I think you tough it out, and so it didn't have anything to do with nerves or that. And then it occurred later on, a few years later, when I was lifting, and it just, then I started to have some numbing and some discomfort. But yeah, those would have been the worst ones. And of course, concussions were,
Yeah.
I had many of those. So
And how did you feel
yeah.
after recovery? How did you feel getting yourself up and going again and, competing again and just building your confidence up? How did,
Yeah. I think most of the time I was in denial of what had happened. So it was just, okay, we need to get going. So at the end of the bobsleigh career, it was, I had to get back in the gym and get caught up on the Olympic lifting side, because we had the nationals, and then we had another event later in the summer, and then there was one that I would lift in prior to going back to Europe to bobsleigh, and those were all helpful, very helpful on the bobsleigh side. But yeah, I was in denial mostly of many of my things that were going on. Was
yeah.
just stay in the channel and stay focused, like sleep, eat, train, sleep, eat, train. It wasn't, I wasn't a very wide dimensional person. Like, there wasn't much culture. There was a lot of, like, broken relationships, because it's like, yeah, I got to go training. Like, I think it could have been all handled in a much healthier way. But
Well, that's all they knew, right? You only just, living life like you don't know any better. No one's told you any better.
yeah, I just woke up there a few years ago,
Yeah.
you
So
know.
tell me, so you're still coaching? Do you coach you mentors to other coaches?
Yeah, yeah, which I'm enjoying, and I like, it's very important that I keep it separate. I'm coaching coaches who are coaching athletes for performance. I'm not coaching coaches who are involved in the post career of athletes, where I would be looking from my side as a therapist on balance. Your gym when you're retired, not to train the same exercise exercises with less weight. You go to get balanced, like physically balanced, you know,
Yeah.
and asking them to look at different types of yoga to get that mind body connection again, where it's like to be balanced and bring your mind into it in terms of being somebody who's conscious of the world. Sometimes I get going down that road a little far, but it's like, you know, when you're an athlete, stay in the channel, stay focused. That's your job that you've committed to, and that's what you want to do. I don't want you to think of world politics or the rhythm of the world or what's going on. But when you retire, now you've got to make the shift. So I'm clear with the coaches that I work with, that I talk to, like that their role is doing this. It's not doing other stuff.
Yes. And just to stay on point with that, because I had an interview with Ryan, and it's funny, he says that him realizing now as a coach, you need to have some sort of, psychology degree, because having to understand, the athletes and having to switch from one type of personality to this type of personality. And as you say, having them balanced and you staying balanced as a coach.
Yeah.
Do you think, you know, do you partake in that and in coaching the coaches for them to stay balanced as well,
Yeah.
so that they
Yeah.
can give off that same frequency, that same vibration?
Yeah, I sometimes say to coaches, you don't have to have competed at the highest level, but you have to have understood the steps. And you're coaching that kid to be better than you ever were in all the areas. But you have to start looking at the pie. If you don't take care of their mental health, it doesn't matter what you're doing in the gym on the physical side. They're going to break down. And we see that in Canada with some of our, exemplary hockey players, people who are well respected and we look up to, or, you follow these teams and they're stepping away from the game for a month, 6 weeks to gather themselves. And so, yeah, I think I think you have to have an understanding. Maybe man, if you start to go down the road of, do you have to have a psychology degree? You might have to go very far to understand it, but you have to know your piece and just say, this is the piece that I'm contributing to.
Yeah.
And you should also, athlete A, go get this other piece there.
Yes, I agree.
Yeah.
And that's how I'm helping my athletes, because I feel consciously they can't do it because they've got so much stuff going on. They've got training, they've got the coaches on their ear. So subconsciously, they have to innately know what they need to do without even thinking, and being
Yeah.
balanced.
Yeah.
So,
And I don't know that it's available to them unless somebody, presents it to them. They're so fast with their information. You talk to them about something, the next thing you know, they're pulling out their phone and they're Googling it,
exactly.
and that's the Bible. Like,
Yeah.
you're just saying something, but here it's written, and they, they're very focused on that. And it's
Yeah.
like, guys, you just gotta one of the more recent pieces we've seen enter here in Canada, and through a friend who's a yoga instructor, has been the Wim Hof program.
Yes.
Buddy Dan is actually a friend of Wim's and is one of his trainer. And this has been a piece that has been introduced in the Ottawa area where I am, where, they've got the people doing the breath work and just being aware of the breath. So this is, that and the ice tubs, not in terms of the rehab or contrast training, but just in terms of how you have to prepare yourself mentally to sit in the ice water for 2 or 3 minutes. And I found that really refreshing, because that's a component that way back when I was training, we did it in terms of showers. We had one bank of showers that was as cold as they could be, and across was warm. And you would just cycle between the two. But sometimes they would say, just stay in the cold showers. Just relax yourself. Like, just stop the noise. Yeah. So I like that new component that's come in about people following their breath and being aware that, are they mouth breathers, nose breathers? Can they slow their mind down and stop doing their checklists? What's got to get done, and just be with the cold water or the breath, whatever that means.
Have you gone into the ice buckets yourself?
Yeah, I'm a regular. Every morning begins like a 5-minute cold shower, no hot.
Not in
When
the
I'm home.
actual ice bath, Clarke. Have you
Yep.
been? Wow.
Yeah. Yeah, lots. It's it has nothing to do with being tough or whatever, but I really like it when I'm home in Cataquet and we're on the ocean water there. Yeah, it's no problem. It's not no problem. I prepare for it and I like to do it. I'm not anybody that does it for any great length of time, 3 to 5 minutes, and yeah, yeah.
Yeah. And
But
it's
we
got
do.
so many health benefits too.
Yeah, yeah. It's kind of like, we I had the mother that said, don't go out without all these things on. You're going to get pneumonia and you're going to die. My mom's finishing sentence was, you always catch a cold, get pneumonia, die. Everything finished with death. And then the next day, she says, well, go out and get the groceries in the car. It's like, okay, I got to put on my boots and my, all these things. She goes, no, just go get the groceries. And it's like, okay, but yesterday I was going to die if I just went outside and got this. And today I have to just, anyways.
It's
Yeah, a
we've
lot
got
of
an
health
Asian
benefits.
version, Clark. Us, what my mum used to say, don't go outside, you'll get dark. It was this whole thing of Asians don't.
Yeah, yeah,
You got to stay white. I can't
yeah.
help it.
They got us going. Now we just can't go outside. That's
Yeah,
it.
exactly.
Yeah,
I love what I do. I just love it with a passion that hypnosis can help, those mental challenges, those because it's just been coming so rampant globally. And if we don't get people socializing again and connecting again, they're just going to get, more medication. The only thing that's winning out of here is the pharmaceutical companies that are just going to medicate, medicate, and medicate. And
yeah.
you don't necessarily want always to have that as the go-to, right?
No, and I think it shows up in their tissue, like they're not hydrated. They have all their tension. It's like they have a board across their shoulders. They have the forward lean. Their
Yeah.
heads tilted down because they're looking at their phone all the time.
Yes.
They're not out walking. They're not out standing tall. They're not breathing deep. Into their like into their lungs. And I think many of us, I would not include myself, don't want to be our own healers. We're looking for somebody outside to heal us, something outside. I'm disappointed, on many levels in our government's reaction that they didn't early on say, okay, let's look at this and see how we can get healthier in spite of what this virus presents. So our mental health, our let's eliminate type 2 diabetes. Let's start to look at cardiovascular disease, like Dr. Mark Houston looked at, in terms of let's just eat better and let's move better and let's just look at our thoughts. Are these thoughts that are going to project us forward? And many times they're not. We're talking about, the guy that used to run the States before Joe Biden, and all just the chaos of our minds and our thoughts. And I think it's interesting that your background now is and your work is in hypnosis, because I think it would be such a nice step for somebody to go, I think I just need to stop this train of thought and why it's present. And so how can I do it? Well, the best way would be, somebody who can come in and interrupt that pattern of defeat and fear.
Exactly. And from Charles's, what is that habit and that habitual, thought that you have? That how many days do you need to change that habit and that thought you've been carrying for years and years and years? Is 21, 28 days. So I give
Yeah.
my clients recordings, and Charles was on point. He was so ahead of the game, just
Yeah.
so ahead of the game in the training world, knowing about this. You got to change that repetition that's been going into you, change it and twist it, switch it off to a more
Yeah.
positive. He was
Yeah.
so, yeah. So,
Yeah. He was really on so many levels ahead of his game.
yeah, yeah. And I want you to now, for my, people out there listening, Clarke, if people want to reach you and have a chat with you, do a one-on-one, have some mentoring, coaching lessons with you, um, if you don't mind just letting people know where they can contact you, or is that something that you're offering? Is that okay?
Yeah, no, it's fine. Yeah, I think Facebook's probably the fastest way. So Clarke Flynn, Clarke, and then Flynn, and I don't know what my Facebook page
That's all
says,
right.
but I'm there.
I'll put it at the bottom so
I'm
people can
there.
contact
And,
you.
they can always email me. So clarkeflynn@me.com and, me.com. That's always, yeah. Yeah, if I think I can still help somebody, I'd like to,
Oh,
in
you can
terms of
still
that
help
way.
so many people, Clarke.
Well, I tell you, aren't we impressed with this group of people like Dieter and so many others that we've been able to connect to, who do really so many amazing things? Like, if we're going to say anything about Charles, he did connect people to other people who are amazing.
100%. He's so deep.
I can't believe how much he opened the world, of people across the world that are, whether they agree with him or not, it's not about that. It's they're connected to people.
I agree.
And I think
that's how I got into fascial stretching and Chris and Ann.
Yeah. Amazing, eh? And they were one of my first forays into soft tissue was Ann and Chris when they came to Toronto. And it was just, wow, look at what first of all, what an amazing couple that you can work together 24/7.
Yeah, exactly.
That says a lot about who they are.
Does.
But
a lot of therapy needed there.
But it just was one of those things. And again, through Charles, like he just would open doors, and he didn't always stand around saying, you owe me. No. He just charged us for us. That's all.
Yeah.
But
I'm so grateful for Charles. I wouldn't be where I am today if it wasn't for Charles. I mean, he just opened up so many worlds for me, and I'm truly grateful and appreciative. And he's up there now.
I thank him every day, and I've not met anyone across any of the communities I've ever been involved with who has given people an opportunity to find a career as he did. And maybe I'm shallow in my world in that I just touch certain people, but I can't think of any professor or teacher that I hear about when I'm listening to the news or read a book or read some line in somewhere, or hear it from another podcast of a person who connected so many people and moved them forward in their industry.
Oh, absolutely right, Clarke. Absolutely right. He's deeply, every day, sorely missed, but forever grateful of what he was able to do in the industry and touch so many souls, touch so many lives.
Yeah. I like that guy.
You like the guy. I'm sure you liked him more for his character. His very unique character.
Yeah.
So on that point, I would love you to, reflect. Is there anything that you would like to share with the audience of your own personal view on training or on mindset, on absolutely anything?
Yeah. Well,
I saw.
Yeah. I think in the world of training, there's so many different ways to train yourself into excellence in an event, but you have to be able to put yourself there. Like it's not what weight you lifted or what exercise you did or what track you ran on. It's really, you have to put yourself there, and you have to be resilient. And that's a very difficult thing for people to be now, because we do have lots of excuses for why we don't succeed. And we have to be honest with ourselves. But I was for sure not the best athlete, and not the fastest and not the strongest. But Charles used to say, like, I just could work. But, and I don't want to say it was because I was in denial of what I couldn't do. It was more that I just kept finding these wonderful opportunities to be around great coaches. And I was good enough to shut up and listen.
Yeah.
I was coachable, and I didn't jump around a lot. I didn't jump, like, oh, here's a better coach. I seem to have gotten good coaches and good training partners and maximized my time in front of them, and just tried them. And if it worked, then let's do more of it and work better at it. And if it didn't work, then how can we adapt?
Yeah.
Exactly. So I never really, I was just very fortunate, but I did listen. I didn't listen afterwards, but I really listened then, you
Then,
know?
yeah. Well, I
Yeah.
love that. I love that so much. And I love that you were able to come on and just have a talk with me and just spend your time with me and sharing all your lovely stories and your thoughts. And thank you for sharing. And hopefully, if you don't mind coming back on again at some stage,
Oh,
we'll have something
yeah,
else
I'd
to talk
love
about.
to. Yeah, it's been a while since we could get together in person. So, yes, thank
It's
you.
been a long
I
time. Thank you to the audience. And again, if you want to contact Clarke, please have a look below. Contact me. He's available and he's the most genuine, sincere man I know. So enjoy his coaching career and his teachings. So thank you.